could really make sure I don't miss anything and give you an idea of the scope of what we're talking about. And please keep in mind that Shaping Rotary's Future was designed and asked to create a concept of what Rotary would look like if we were start Rotary today. So that's exactly what we've done, and we've been doing this for about 2 years, and we've come up with some suggestions. Keep in mind that this is not something that is fixed in stone. Quite often in Rotary, when we hear about suggestions, recommendations, they're already done, and we're told this is what we're doing. We did not want to do that. What we want to do is get input from the world of Rotary and get ideas as to how we could make it better, take some things out, put some things in. So please don't walk away thinking this is something that is going to happen. This is strictly ideas, suggestions, one way to go forward, because we need to think about Rotary in a different light. We know we need change after 115 years of doing what we do and do so well, but we're at a crossroads in our organization, we believe. And I'm going to show you some of those reasons why, and then talk to you about the model itself that we've created. And again, it's very flexible here, but it's a start to what we want to try to accomplish. So let me jump into the reasons why. First of all, please be assured, we do not want to change our core values. What Rotary stands for today is recognized around the world. And when governments want to do major change in their countries, they turn to Rotary, partly because our core values are what they are. The fellowship, the integrity, the diversity, the service, the leadership is critical to who we are. We don't want to change who we are. What we want to change is how we do what we do. Think about it. This is how we got here. We know that we are strong believers in diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want to include better gender diversity, age diversity, racial diversity, et cetera, et cetera. We want to make sure we represent our communities. That's been in our bylaws forever, and we need to understand that that's important. And yet, when you look at the makeup of the organization around the world, we aren't as diverse as we should be and as we want to be. So we have to encourage clubs and districts to look more at that diversity and make sure we are covered. So part of this new strategy would be to create an organization, a structure that would allow for better diversity in leadership positions. We also know there's a strong desire for regionalization. And while we get some negative feedback on some aspects of this, the regionalization, pretty much everybody agrees. There's no reason why we can't keep Rotary what it is and yet do it a little different in different regions of the country. And so we're going to talk about that regionalization as we go forward. But it's important to appreciate that that's really the essence of this recommendation. Let's understand what regions should be all about and let them do things a little differently. We also want to change the responsibilities of leadership positions. And again, I'll touch on this later, but we have added so much to our leaders that they have to pick and choose what they can do. They can't do it all. We have so many now, hundreds of responsibilities for a district governor, and they can't possibly do it. And we put an action plan together over the last 2 years of how we're going to get to where we have to go. So think about it. Why are we doing this? Over 10 years, we have brought almost 1.4 million people into Rotary. That's how many we brought into the organization, and yet we only have less than 1.2 million members. Does that right away tell you that we're doing something wrong? And the answer to that is yes. We are not engaging our members to stay with us. So keep that in mind as we go forward, is that we are really good at recruiting new members and not good at keeping them in the organization. The new structure will be aimed partly at being able to engage members by being a more direct approach to our clubs around the world. When you look at the retention of members, you notice that year 2 is high. But when you get on in 10 years later, those who started out, the trend is that we lose most of those new members within the first 2 years. Why? Because simply we're not engaging them. They come in with certain expectations. They've heard about this incredible organization, and we're the best humanitarian organization in the world. We do more service than any other organization in the world. We're fantastic. But when they come into a club, they don't always see that that club is contributing what they think they should. So we're not meeting the expectations of every one of these. And that means we have to do more to help the clubs individually in a direct way to engage all those new members so they stay with us for the long term. We have to always remember, we have to convert a new member to a Rotarian. And if we don't do it in that first 2 years, they leave and they go somewhere else. When we did our 2020 strategic plan survey, and you could see what the priorities were, the number one priority at 60% was to enhance participant engagement. Going again, right back, even our clubs appreciate that we're not engaging our members like we should. When you look at our diversity, just in the gender area, you'll see that we've actually been doing better in the last 10 years in female diversity. We've increased pretty well. When you look at around the world, we're about 23, 24%, but different countries have different percentages. And we need to keep working on those percentages to get them up to where they should be. And I'll just throw in as an aside, when you look at Rotaract, they are much better at this diversity than we are. And that's part of why we need to make sure we're learning from them as to what we could do better. They appreciate it. They have most of the world is 50-50, and in some areas there are more females than males. They're doing really well. Let's learn from them, but let's continue this drive. And let's remember, it's not just about gender diversity. It's also age, race, abilities, etc. So we need to keep working on diversity. When you look at the age of our clubs, it's fascinating to note that in India, that's the country that has the biggest percentage of new clubs started within the last 10 years, really doing a great job. Is that connected to the fact they also have the #1 membership growth in the Rotary world? We need to look at that correlation and then ask ourselves, when you look at the other countries, you look at Japan, and they have the smallest rate of new clubs. Perhaps that's something we have to look at. And I know President Mark Maloney, President Holger are both looking very carefully and asking districts around the world, look at creating new clubs. One of the benefits of a new club is that when you have a club that the average age is very high, they tend not to be able to recruit younger members. But if we start with the younger members in new clubs, we can grow at a faster rate. India, I think, is proving that to us. And I congratulate those of you from India and other countries who are doing such a good job in that. When you look at our regional leaders and the gender data, you could see that we still have leaders are still significantly men. Interestingly, the RPICs and the assistant RPICs are moving up pretty quickly compared to everything else, but still primarily men. We need to improve our diversity in our leadership positions. We are so fortunate, in 2 years, we will have a female president of Rotary International. I think that'll really stimulate us all to recognize the abilities that the females are bringing to our organization. She's going to be an outstanding president for us, and she's going to set an example so that we can increase the numbers of female leaders, because to get to president, you've got to be a leader in many aspects of the organization. So we've got to do better so that it's more equally represented in all of our leadership positions. Now, the value of this, we've got to think about what is the value of what we're trying to do? Well, with Rotarians and Rotaractors, we've got to improve the engagement. So it goes right to direct and regionalized support for our Rotary, for our individual members of our clubs. That's what it's all about, and that's what we really want to focus on in the new model that we've created. Rotarians reach the Rotaractors, every one of them, direct basis, and we're going to have more success rather than talking from the top and the people at the other end of the scale basically aren't hearing us. Let's get that much closer together and more direct. The value of regionalization, and we'll talk about how we define that later, but that's important. More diversity in leadership, I've talked about. We want to create a clearly defined path for leadership development and for growth so that there's actually more opportunity in this for individual members to get to leadership positions and therefore love Rotary and what we do and participate and help us grow even faster. We're going to move things like election disputes to be handled on a regional level so that the RI board doesn't have to deal with those kind of things. And we believe there's much greater efficiencies in this model. This will give you a picture of the organization chart. Now, we didn't look at the RI board of directors or the trustees, but we did start from below those two boards. What we want to do with the cadre is instead of having these coordinators, and you saw the list from EMGAs to RCs to RPICs, we want to put all of those into a cadre where instead of a push is what we call it, we want to pull. So where today the expectation is that the coordinators reach out to clubs, we want to do it the other way around where the clubs, with the help of their leaders, reach out to experts in the area that they need expert assistance. So the cadre becomes into a pool and also becomes more regionalized. So there are experts in all fields of Rotary, certified by Rotary as an expert, and then we can draw them down for the regions to help us with clubs that need specific help. And of course, the secretariat still stays where they are. Over time, if we do well enough with the cadre, we should be able to reduce the numbers in the secretariat, but also put more of the secretariat in international offices so that, again, they're closer to the regions and can be doing better to help the regions. Then we have the regional council. And again, we'll explain more about how we define that. The regional council then over a certain number of areas, maybe 20 to 40 regions around the world. And we're still working on those kind of numbers, what makes sense as a region, not arbitrary. And then under the council, we have these leaders who have specific responsibility for the clubs, but no administration. They don't have to deal with administration. Their job is to know what the clubs are doing and guide the clubs to help their weak areas, share their strong areas, motivate them, guide them. A different type of leader than the assistant governor we have today. It's not about administration. The administration is handled at the regional council. The leader is there to motivate, to get people excited about being part of Rotary, not just being a club that does their own thing. And then, of course, the clubs, we have Rotaractors, Rotarians, and our new model for global membership, which won't be through a club. So that gives you the picture of what the organization would look like. When you look at the regional level, I mentioned 20 to 40 regions look globally, which would provide flexibility to address the specific needs of that region of the world. And when you do that, you can make it more relevant to the local Rotarians and Rotaractors. And by being more relevant, it gives them a better experience. And we'll be able to reach out to the clubs better than they would have in the past. So how do we define regions? We want to create regions primarily based on culture. But of course, if you only base it on culture, then we're going to have 200 regions around the world, which is too much because every country has its own culture. But basically by culture, add in an aspect of language. If we can get all in one region to have one language, that does make it easier for that communication. However, you can't make that work in every country of the world, in every region of the world, but that's a part of it. We also want to look at the needs and the focus in that particular region to make sure that's consistent. look at geography so we don't have these wide-ranging geographical zones that we have today, that really one end of the geography of that zone never sees the other end of the zone. We need to be more focused on a geography that makes sense. And of course, we've got to be more efficient in that. Now, we put together a possible breakdown of regions. I'm not going to go through this for the simple reason that this is still in discussion. We ended up with 28 regions, but I think we're going to, as we go through this and talk about directors in each of these areas, we're going to break this down further. So I could see us getting to 35 or 40 regions. So again, I'm not going to go through those details. The proposal we have, and the key here is the 1,874 sections. And a section is that group of clubs under that leader we saw on the organization chart. Because we only want those leaders to have 20, 25 clubs, maybe even less. In talking to a couple of our pilots, they want them to have only 10 clubs each. So this number of sections could go up. Each one of those then have a leader. So that's so many more opportunities to develop leaders around the world to continue moving up in the organization and get that kind of exposure and experience. The idea of the section leader having so few clubs is so they really can focus on helping them from a motivational, from a guidance, from bringing them help from the cadre and from the regional boards. And again, I'm trying not to go through too much detail. We can leave some of that to questions. The prior slide did show the possible pilots, but we've already changed this since we put this slide together. And we're now talking with the board about only going with 2, possibly 3 pilots. Easier to manage, easier to control, less costly. When you run a pilot, it's going to be costly. So we've got to do this in a way that makes sense. And when you run a pilot, we've got to make sure we know what outcomes we're going to measure to say that that pilot was successful. So when you look at our timeline from when we started, we are now in an aspect of putting together the real details. What's it going to cost exactly? Who's going to be in the pilots? How is the pilot going to run? How are we going to do the transition? Our committee of 8 or 9 has 12 subcommittees. So you can imagine the activity of these Rotarians, and I have the greatest respect for all of them, is phenomenal. They're working really hard to come up with details, everything from how are we going to communicate this, what are we going to measure for outcomes, what's the cost going to be, et cetera, et cetera. Now in 2022, we have to go to the Council on Legislation, not to approve this model, but to approve the ability for the board to approve a pilot of this size. It's bigger than we've ever done before. It's a different type of pilot than we've done before. So we're asking the council not to approve how we do it, but to approve having a pilot. In other words, council, please let us try this in 2 or 3 excuse me, regions of the world that want to do something different, that appreciate they need help. And that's all we're asking the council for. From there, we would then move into starting the pilots. And we'd have to run them for 2 or 3 years before we see results. And while we run them, we're going to have to run the old system in parallel. So we're running both so we can compare the 2. And at the end of that, we then have some outcomes we can measure. And then based on those outcomes, we go back to the next Council on Legislation. So yeah, this is long-term. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight. You know, quite often some of us complain it takes years to make any change in Rotary. But this is important to take our time to do it right, to make sure that it makes sense to regions around the world. So right now, what the board has given us the opportunity to do is to have discussions with senior leaders to make sure that all our senior leaders understand the recommendations and what we're doing and where we're headed. And I've had the opportunity at least 10 times last year to speak with the Board of Trustees of the Foundation and the Board of Directors of Rotary International to continue getting their feedback as well as tell them where we stand. So we're really working hard with them, and all of them don't agree that this is the right way to go, in all honesty. And some of them feel we don't need change. However, when you look at the numbers, I don't know how they feel that, but that's a fact. We're all different. You know, as they say, with 1.2 million Rotarians, we have 1.4 million opinions. And we have to work with all of those. And that's why we're starting early to get opinions back. They also have agreed that we can go out to Rotarians and Rotaractors and talk about it and get input back, which is why I'm here with you today. So you can think about these, and we're not going to cover everything today, but you think about them and certainly get back to us if you have any ideas or thoughts about what we should do different. This is just the decision, the last decision that the board made on what we should be doing, where we are. So they've approved us to continue to develop it, and as I say, to talk to our senior leaders and Rotarians. So that's pretty much our plan. And again, I remind you, this isn't set in stone. These are ideas. We need a new way to structure our organization so that we reach into Rotary clubs and Rotaract clubs more directly to give them the help that they need. And we all know there are really great clubs out there that don't need us to do anything. They're doing fantastic work. They do the work of Rotary. But there's also a large number of clubs that aren't doing what they should be doing. They're not strong clubs. And if we could just reach them directly, individually, and help them with whatever they need help with, we could elevate them. Imagine if all 36,000 Rotary clubs and all 11,000 Rotaract clubs were strong. Imagine how much more work we would do. We would at least double the service that we do around the world to make our world a better place. And in my mind, that's what we need to be doing. We all know it's the Rotary clubs and Rotaract clubs that do the work of Rotary. It's not people like me. I talk. It's not the senior leaders who at the board. It's not the trustees. They make decisions. They have to handle our policies and procedures. But it's the clubs around the world who are doing the service of Rotary to make our world a better place. And we need to be able to have an organization that gives them the help they need on an individual basis. By doing that, we're going to make our organization better, stronger, and more durable for the future. We're strong, don't get me wrong. I still think we're the best humanitarian organization in the world, but we are dropping in membership. That's a fact. Now, COVID-19 complicated that, so we're losing members now because of COVID. That's understandable. But we're now talking about, the discussion is next year we'll drop from almost 1.2 million to 1,150,000. That's a significant drop for us, more than we've ever had, partly due to COVID. But when you compound COVID with our lack of engagement for individuals so they don't stay with us, that's a problem. And we talked about Rotaract. By bringing Rotaract into the fold so they feel that they truly are respected as a member of the organization, they're going to want to stay in a Rotary club when they're finished. That alone could increase our membership over 2 or 3 years by 100,000 members. And that's why we push that so hard, because that's an opportunity. Here we have these individuals who know Rotary, and yet they all leave. They don't stay with Rotary. We need to encourage them to stay by doing what they expect from us. They want to do what Rotary does to make the world better. They don't necessarily want to do it the way we do it. So let's change the way we do it to help get them in. Anyway, I know I don't want to use all our time. We have some great panelists, and I'm sure you've got a lot of hard questions for us. So I thank you for listening. Thank you for patience of listening to something that isn't fixed in stone, that's just ideas, but that could possibly help our organization for the long term. So